How many things did Grandma teach us about cooking that turned out to be completely wrong? Her kitchen rules came from love, habit, and the best intentions of her time. What happens when the comfort of her wisdom meets the truth we've learned since? Rinsing raw chicken before cooking was one of those old habits that seemed like it made perfect sense. After all, if washing vegetables made them clean, why not wash meat too? Grandma believed it removed germs and grime, a simple act of care and caution in her kitchen. But what she did not know was that rinsing poultry splashed invisible bacteria across sinks, counters, and nearby food. It was not cleaning, it was cross-contaminating. The water droplets carried harmful bacteria like salmonella far beyond the sink, sometimes even onto her apron. Back then, without the same access to food safety knowledge or dish sanitizers, this ritual became a generational habit passed down like a secret trick. It felt responsible, even loving, to clean dinner before cooking. But the truth is, heat is the only true sanitizer your chicken ever needed. What Grandma thought was protecting her family actually put them at greater risk. Still, you can almost imagine her humming by the sink, proud of keeping a tidy kitchen, never knowing that the myth was the mess all along. Searing meat to seal in juices was another gem straight from Grandma's proudest cooking lessons. She would insist on browning the sides fast and hot, claiming it locked the flavor inside. The idea was comforting, that something as simple as a quick sizzle could preserve tenderness. But science caught up, and we learned that searing does not seal anything in. It creates a beautiful crust, yes, and a lot of flavor through caramelization. But those juices? They still escape as the meat cooks. The myth probably came from that glorious smell, the kind that filled the kitchen with the promise of Sunday dinner. Grandma swore by it because it worked, or at least seemed to. What she really discovered was the Maillard reaction, though she would never have called it that. Her intuition was spot on, even if the explanation was not. It turns out searing was worth keeping for taste, just not for the reason she thought. Boiling vegetables until soft was one of those rules that sounded nurturing. Grandma saw tenderness as a sign of comfort. A cooked carrot should bend, not crunch. But what she did not realize was that boiling for too long drained every ounce of color, texture, and nutrients right into the pot. The water became more nutritious than the meal itself. Wartime habits taught people that soft meant safe, especially when refrigeration was unreliable and fresh produce did not last long. Overcooked greens became a marker of care, not culinary error. Even so, that mushy texture became a quiet tragedy on countless dinner plates. Today, we steam and roast instead, letting vegetables keep their bite, flavor, and vitamins intact. If Grandma could taste a crisp roasted bean or butter-glazed carrot now, she might just forgive us for breaking her favorite rule. Cooking pasta until it was soft enough was almost a household standard. Grandma judged doneness by the way it squished between her fingers, not by timing or texture. The term al dente had not yet made its way into everyday kitchens, and chewy noodles felt half-cooked to her. So she kept boiling until the pasta surrendered completely. It was easy to chew, filling, and guaranteed to feed everyone. But all that softness came at a cost. Soggy noodles that soaked up too much sauce and lost their flavor. The habit was born from a time when food waste was a sin, and anything undercooked felt ungrateful. Now we know that pasta should hold a little fight, a little bite, to carry flavor better and feel alive on the plate. Grandma might call it underdone, but we would call it perfect. Using margarine instead of butter was not just a choice, it was a revolution in Grandma's time. Advertisements in the 1960s and 1970s told families that margarine was progress on a plate, healthier and more scientific than the old dairy staple. Butter was branded as indulgent, even dangerous, while margarine came wrapped in the promise of modern living. Grandma believed it, proudly switching out her butter dish for a bright yellow tub. She thought she was protecting her family from cholesterol and heart disease, unaware that the trans fats inside were silently doing more harm. Still, margarine meant optimism, the taste of a world chasing convenience and change. Sunday breakfasts, toast, and pie crusts all carried that same memory of care, not deceit. Even science had not caught up yet, so her choice was not ignorance but trust. She believed in better living through knowledge, even if that knowledge was incomplete. Today, we smile at her mistake but love her intention, proof that even wrong turns in the kitchen were paved with love. Keeping eggs on the counter was not carelessness in Grandma's time, it was common sense. Out on the farm, fresh eggs came straight from the hen, unwashed and covered in a natural protective coating called the bloom. That invisible layer kept bacteria out, making refrigeration unnecessary. She believed room temperature kept the yolks richer and the shells stronger, and for her, it worked. Breakfast was always quick, easy, and safe. But when egg production became industrial, the story changed. Factory washing stripped away that protective layer, leaving the eggs vulnerable to salmonella and spoilage. The same habit that once made sense now carried hidden risk. Still, Grandma's counter display, a bowl of brown eggs glowing in morning light, felt like home. It was a symbol of trust in simplicity, a reminder of when food came from hands, not machines. Today, we refrigerate for safety, but we cannot help admiring how her world made even a kitchen shelf feel alive. Adding salt to coffee grounds to cut bitterness was one of Grandma's earliest lessons in thrift and taste. She learned it from her own mother, who believed a pinch of salt smoothed out even the roughest roast. It was simple logic. The salt masked bitterness when beans were cheap and brewing was basic. Her percolator hissed and bubbled on the stove, filling the air with the scent of morning. The coffee might not have been fancy, but it was steady and strong, meant to keep everyone awake through long days. The salt trick worked just enough to soften the edge, though it also dulled the depth. Still, Grandma's version of coffee was never about flavor notes or origins. It was about comfort. It was the sound of spoons clinking, the warmth of the cup between her palms, and the small ritual that began each day. Today, we grind, measure, and debate pour-over methods, but her pinch of salt remains its own kind of poetry, a reminder that care can hide in the simplest acts. Flipping pancakes repeatedly was practically a ritual, one that felt like the very rhythm of the kitchen itself. Grandma believed that constant motion kept them fluffy, evenly browned, and safe from burning. She stood close by, spatula in hand, ready to catch the exact second bubbles appeared on the surface. Every flip was an act of control, a way to stay connected to what she was creating. What she did not know, though, was that each flip pushed out air and flattened the rise she wanted. Pancakes need rest, stillness, and time to grow that golden crust, but standing idle felt wrong to her. She had learned to cook by eye and instinct, not by waiting on timers or trusting thermostats. Old stoves were unpredictable, so she hovered and adjusted with care. Her method came from love, not impatience, a belief that her watchfulness made the food better. And while modern cooks might wince at her deflated stacks, her family never complained. Each warm pancake carried the taste of habit, history, and affection, and sometimes that is enough. Maybe the pancakes did not need to be perfect to matter. Maybe Grandma already knew the real rise was in the comfort they brought. Boiling canned vegetables again, just in case, was one of those habits born from a lifetime of caution. Grandma grew up in a world that did not always trust what came sealed in tins. Stories of spoiled food, unreliable storage, and mysterious illnesses like botulism haunted her generation. So even when canned goods became safer, she clung to what she knew. Boil it again, better safe than sorry. It was an extra step of love disguised as paranoia. But by the time she reheated those green beans or corn, the color and texture had already given up. The flavor turned flat, the nutrients gone, but it felt safe, and that mattered more. That pot of soft vegetables symbolized survival through scarcity. She cooked like someone who had seen food vanish before, and her caution was her way of fighting that fear. We can laugh now, with our labels and expiration dates, but those boiling pots held a kind of devotion too. She believed she was protecting her family one can at a time. The science has changed, but that instinct to double-check, that will probably never leave us. Storing tomatoes in the fridge felt like a smart idea in Grandma's kitchen. Coolness meant safety, and safety meant one less worry on her long list. She believed the chill would keep them firm, fresh, and ready for the next salad or stew. What she did not know was that cold air quietly stripped away the tomato's soul. It dulled the sweetness, flattened the tang, and turned that sun-warmed fruit into something lifeless. Still, the logic made perfect sense in her world. Wasting food was unthinkable when every penny counted, and a fridge was a promise against spoilage. To her, the hum of that appliance was the sound of security. Each tomato tucked inside was a small victory, proof that she had planned ahead. Today we know better, that they belong on the counter, basking in warmth, ripening into flavor. But you cannot falter for trying to make summer last a little longer. The truth is, that cold tomato told a story of care, thrift, and hope. The quiet determination to make things last when so little ever did. Using flour to thicken every sauce was practically law in Grandma's kitchen. She believed that flour made gravies hearty, soups filling, and sauces stick better to the plate. A few spoonfuls were all it took to make something feel homemade and substantial. But too much of a good thing can turn magic into mush. The flour thickened everything, yes, but it also dulled flavors and left sauces heavy and gluey instead of smooth and silky. In truth, Grandma was following the wisdom of her time when cream and butter were scarce and flour was cheap. It gave texture to meals that needed comfort more than elegance. And to be fair, a lumpy gravy on a cold night was still love served warm. Today, we reach for reductions, cornstarch, and patience, letting flavors thicken naturally. Yet somewhere between her bubbling pot and our modern sauces, there is nostalgia for that old spoonful of flour, clumsy, familiar, and kind. Cooking meat straight from the fridge was another shortcut born of practicality. Grandma did not have time to let roasts or chops sit around warming on the counter. Dinner needed to happen when it needed to happen. But cold meat hitting a hot pan cooked unevenly, charred outside, underdone inside. She would fix it by cooking longer, drying it out in the process. The result was a pattern of tough, dry meals she swore were well done. The science simply was not part of her routine. She relied on sound and smell, not temperature. And yet, her intent was the same as ours, to feed with care, to make it safe. She had no thermometer, only instinct, and instinct said, "Get it on the stove before it spoils." Today, we rest our meat and call it precision. Grandma called it wasting time. But somehow, even her overcooked cuts carried flavor, because they were seasoned with love and habit, and that has never gone out of style. Washing cast iron with soap was one of Grandma's unbreakable rules, as sacred as prayer before supper. "Never use soap," she'd warn, clutching her skillet like a family heirloom. And in a way, it was. Dark, heavy, seasoned with years of cornbread, bacon, and memory. She scrubbed it with salt, wiped it clean, and greased it tenderly before tucking it away for tomorrow's use. The idea was simple. Soap stripped away flavor, heritage, and history. Back then, she was right. Soaps were made with lye, harsh enough to peel the black right off the pan. But times changed, and modern soaps grew gentle, leaving the old fear behind. Still, the myth lived on, carried more by love than by logic. Every swirl of that salt scrub was a quiet act of devotion. Cast iron was not just cookware, it was lineage, survival, proof that nothing good should be wasted. She might have been wrong about the science, but she was right about the soul. In her kitchen, care mattered more than chemistry, and that skillet outlasted generations because she treated it like something alive. Cooking everything in bacon grease was Grandma's secret ingredient and her greatest joy. She kept an old tin of it by the stove, its lid dented from years of use, shining like gold in the morning light. Every dish began with a spoonful: collard greens, biscuits, eggs, even beans. Bacon grease was her butter, her oil, her cure for blandness. It was the perfume of her kitchen, smoky and comforting, a reminder that flavor could rise out of frugality. She learned it from necessity, when butter was too expensive and waste was unthinkable. Every drop mattered, but too much of a good thing turned heavy fast, coating every plate with salt and fat. Still, she believed a little indulgence never hurt anyone who worked as hard as she did. Today, doctors would gasp at her pantry, but her food had something no substitute could replicate: warmth. That grease was her signature, a reminder that resourcefulness could taste delicious. When she said, "Don't pour that out," it was not thrift talking, it was love, bottled and saved for the next meal. Leaving butter out all day was one of those old comforts that made perfect sense in Grandma's time. Her kitchen was cool in winter, shaded in summer, and the butter dish sat proudly on the counter under a glass dome. It was soft, golden, and ready for biscuits at sunrise or cornbread at dusk. She saw no danger in it, only convenience. Refrigerators hummed inconsistently back then, and heating was mild enough that butter rarely spoiled. But modern homes, sealed tight and warm, turned that same habit risky. Today's kitchens invite bacteria faster than her open windows ever did. Still, there was something beautiful in her defiance of cold butter. She believed food should welcome you, not fight your knife. Science says, refrigerate. Grandma said, serve it soft. Her butter dish was a symbol of ease, generosity, and faith in the rhythm of her home. She may have been wrong about storage, but she was right about comfort. Because breakfast should always begin with something that spreads easy and tastes like love. Tasting with wooden spoons while cooking was the truest expression of Grandma's intuition. She did not measure, time, or read labels. She tasted. One stir, one dip, one test, straight from the pot. That spoon never left her hand, worn smooth from decades of stews and sauces. She claimed it seasoned the food, and maybe, in its own way, it did. What she could not see was the tiny exchange of bacteria each time. Harmless in small families, but far from safe in science's eyes. Yet that spoon was more than a tool. It was connection. She knew when the soup needed salt, when the gravy was just right, all without a recipe. Modern kitchens talk about hygiene and precision, but hers spoke of instinct. That wooden spoon was an extension of her care, proof that good cooking lives in the senses, not the rules. Maybe she risked a few germs, but she never risked losing the taste of home. Relying on sight to judge meat doneness was as common as the smell of dinner itself. Grandma did not have fancy gadgets or digital thermometers. She pressed, she poked, she peeked. If the meat looked brown and the juices ran clear, she called it done. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. Her experience taught her more than most charts ever could, but not enough to guarantee safety. The danger of undercooked meat was invisible, and she trusted what her eyes could see. You can picture her leaning over the skillet, squinting just to make sure. Her senses were sharp, her methods proud, and her mistakes forgiven. We know better now. Internal temperature matters more than color. But there's something admirable about that confidence. In a world without timers or thermometers, Grandma was the only gauge that mattered. Cooking fish until it did not smell was a rule Grandma followed with unwavering faith. Any trace of that ocean scent meant something was wrong in her mind, so she kept the skillet going until every hint was gone. The result was fish that was tough, dry, and stripped of its gentle flavor, but she served it with pride because it felt safe. Food poisoning was a terrifying thought in a time when refrigeration could not be trusted, and better overdone than sick became her kitchen motto. She cooked with caution born of experience, the kind that put safety above taste. What she could not have known was that smell does not mean danger. It means freshness and life. The sweet scent of sea air that we now treasure reminded her of spoiled food, so she pushed it away. Her meals were cooked with the same fierce love that made her careful about everything else. Every overcooked fillet was a promise of protection, even if it cost her the flavor she never got to enjoy. Today, we flake our fish lightly and embrace that natural aroma, but somewhere in that careful caution lives her unshakable devotion. Adding baking soda to beans to soften faster, was one of those tricks Grandma swore by. She hated waiting hours for beans to cook through, so she reached for that little yellow box and sprinkled a pinch like it was magic. And in some ways it worked. The beans softened quicker, the skins broke down, and dinner came faster. But behind that clever shortcut was a cost she never saw. The soda stripped the beans of their deep, earthy flavor and stole away their nutrients too. Each pot lost more than just texture. It lost its soul. Still, Grandma's goal was not culinary perfection. It was feeding a family on time. She valued thrift, not theory, and every saved minute felt like a victory. Back then, shortcuts were survival, not sin. Even if the flavor faded, her effort never did. Modern cooks might soak overnight and simmer slow, but that patience was a luxury she rarely had. Her beans might not have been perfect, but her heart certainly was. Never opening the oven while baking was one of those kitchen commandments you did not question. Grandma would wag her finger at anyone who dared to peek. "You'll ruin it," she warned, and in her time she was not entirely wrong. Older ovens had minds of their own. Heat escaped easily, flames flickered, and temperature gauges were dreams for the wealthy. Opening the door could mean disaster for a fragile cake or a batch of biscuits. So she watched from outside, hands clasped in hope. That rule became sacred, passed down like scripture. Even now, you can feel the weight of her voice every time you lift an oven handle. Today's ovens are modern marvels that hold steady heat, but the superstition remains, stitched into family kitchens across generations. The truth is, her fear came from love. She wanted every bake to turn out right, every slice to be shared proudly. And even if modern science has proved her wrong, you would never tell her that while her pie was still in the oven. Cooling pies on the counter uncovered was one of those charming sights that made Grandma's kitchen feel like a dream. The scent of cinnamon, butter, and fruit drifting through the air was its own invitation to come sit for a while. She believed the open air helped pies set and cool faster, and in her world, it did. But what she could not have known was that leaving food out uncovered invited bacteria and quick spoilage. Without the consistent refrigeration and food safety awareness we have today, pies that sat out too long were ticking time bombs. Still, there was a certain poetry in that practice. Cooling windowsills lined with dessert were symbols of abundance and warmth. The danger did not fit the picture of comfort she was creating. And truthfully, no one ever said no to a fresh slice, even if it had been sitting out since dawn. Today, we wrap, cover, and chill. But that comes at the cost of the magic she unknowingly served with every uncovered pie. Her mistake was simple, but her intention was pure, to fill the house with sweetness that lingered even when it should have been sealed away. Using metal utensils on non-stick pans was something Grandma never thought twice about. Back in her day, pans were made of cast iron, enamel, or thick aluminum that could handle just about anything. She flipped, stirred, and scraped with steel spoons and spatulas like a pro. But when non-stick cookware entered the scene, that same habit turned destructive. Those shiny black surfaces were not indestructible. Each scrape stripped away the coating piece by piece. The tiny flakes, invisible at first, would find their way into the food. Grandma would have been horrified to learn it, but the materials of her time never taught her otherwise. Her kitchen was about durability, not delicacy. And even when the pans began to wear down, she did what she always did, kept using them until they gave out completely. Modern kitchens call for softer tools, but Grandma's metal ones told a story of endurance. She may have scratched a few pans, but she never scratched her commitment to making meals that mattered. Draining all fat from ground meat was one of Grandma's proudest healthy tricks. She believed that grease meant guilt, and a good cook knew how to pour every last drop down the drain. It felt cleaner, safer, better for the family. But what she could not have known was that fat carried most of the flavor. Without it, her burgers and meatloaves turned dry and crumbly, even if no one dared to tell her. She was cooking during a time when doctors, ads, and magazines warned women that fat was dangerous, a silent enemy lurking in every meal. So she adapted with discipline, trading taste for the promise of health. Today, we know a little fat adds moisture, richness, and satisfaction. Yet watching her tilt that skillet, careful not to spill, you can see it came from care, not ignorance. Her food may have been lean, but her heart was full, and sometimes that balance mattered more than flavor ever could. Rinsing pasta after cooking was practically a badge of cleanliness. Grandma believed that washing away the cloudy water meant washing away starch, and starch to her meant stickiness. So she rinsed every pot of spaghetti under a stream of cold water until it looked fresh and neat. But in doing so, she stripped away the very thing that helped sauce cling. The noodles became slick and slippery, making every bite a chase. It was a habit born from logic, not laziness. Rinse, cool, serve, repeat. In her mind, pasta was just another vessel for sauce, not a science of texture. Modern cooks would cringe at the sight, but Grandma cooked from feel, not formula. She wanted things tidy and dependable, and rinsed noodles fit that rule perfectly. Today, chefs talk about emulsification and starch water, but her goal was simpler: to make dinner quick, clean, and ready to serve. Believing mayonnaise spoiled instantly was one of Grandma's biggest misconceptions. She treated that jar like it was radioactive, terrified it would turn bad the moment it touched room air. Every picnic and sandwich spread came with a whispered warning: "Do not leave it out." But store-bought mayonnaise, with its vinegar and lemon, is actually one of the safest condiments around. The acidity keeps bacteria at bay far better than most homemade sauces ever could. Grandma's fear made sense in her time. Refrigeration was unreliable, and food poisoning stories spread faster than butter. So she lived by caution, covering dishes with ice bowls and tucking leftovers away too soon. Today, we know that her panic was misplaced, but it came from love, not ignorance. She was protecting, not overreacting. And honestly, there is something endearing about that kind of care, even if it meant dry sandwiches and extra trips to the fridge. Cooking everything on high heat to get it done quicker was Grandma's golden rule in a world that never slowed down. Her kitchen was a battlefield of sizzling pans, steaming pots, and hungry mouths waiting at the table. She believed that a strong flame meant progress, food cooking faster, dinner ready sooner, and no time wasted watching it simmer. But what she did not know was that high heat betrayed her, burning the outside while the inside stayed raw. Vegetables lost their crunch, stews lost their soul, and meats turned into chewy reminders of impatience. Still, she stood by it proudly, because in her house, efficiency was love expressed through motion. Every hiss of oil was her way of keeping order, her rhythm of survival. Fast and done was her motto, and in its own way, it worked. Her meals might not have been tender, but they were timely. The family was fed, the night was calm, and that was enough. Today we talk about patience, flavor, and precision, but Grandma's high heat carried something modern kitchens forget: urgency mixed with devotion. Her fire may have been too strong, but so was her heart, and that balance fed more than just the body. Adding oil to pasta water was one of Grandma's proudest cooking secrets, a ritual passed down like gospel truth. She swore that a splash of oil kept noodles from sticking, making the water glisten like liquid gold. With her wooden spoon in hand, she stirred proudly, believing she had outsmarted the pot. But the truth was less magical. The oil floated harmlessly on top, never touching the pasta below. Worse, when the noodles drained, they carried a slick film that rejected every drop of sauce. Still, Grandma's faith in her trick never wavered. Her pot stayed neat, her pasta separated, and no one dared challenge her certainty. It was not about science. It was about routine, the comfort of doing something the way it had always been done. Modern chefs now say all you need is a good stir and patience. But Grandma's gleaming water symbolized care, not chemistry. She may not have known why it worked or did not, but her kitchen was not built on accuracy. It was built on affection. Her food might have slipped a little, but her love never did. And that makes her wrong recipe feel right even now. Boiling potatoes whole for mashed potatoes was one of Grandma's most trusted shortcuts. It was simple, tidy, and efficient. No peeling, no fuss, just straight into the pot. She believed it saved time, but the truth was less forgiving. The outside softened too fast while the centers stayed stubborn and firm, leaving lumps that no amount of mashing could ever fix. Yet Grandma never minded. She added butter, milk, salt, and muscle, transforming imperfection into comfort. Each bump in the mash told its own story of tired hands, full hearts, and family waiting at the table. Her mashed potatoes were less about technique and more about tenderness. They filled bellies and warmed rooms, proof that effort mattered more than texture. We now know to cut potatoes evenly for creamy results, but Grandma's version tasted like home, flaws and all. She was feeding love, not guests, and that made every lump part of her signature charm. In the end, her uneven mash taught more than any recipe could. That good food is never perfect, just honest. And sometimes that is what makes it unforgettable. Cooking vegetables with baking soda to keep them green was one of Grandma's proudest scientific tricks. She had read it somewhere or heard it from a friend. A pinch of soda and your greens would stay bright, not dull. And it worked, at least in color. Her peas glowed, her beans gleamed, and dinner looked beautiful on the table. But what she could not see was what the soda was stealing. The nutrients dissolved away, the flavor faded, and the tender crunch turned limp. Still, she believed she was doing right, bringing vibrancy to every meal. In her mind, bright color meant health, and every meal needed to look alive. Modern cooks blanch instead, keeping both hue and nutrition, but the instinct remains the same. She was trying to give beauty to her family's plate, even if the method missed the mark. Her greens might have been wrong, but her heart was never greener. Believing fresh was always better than frozen was one of Grandma's strongest culinary convictions. In her world, frozen food was new, unreliable, and often bland. She had grown up with gardens, root cellars, and markets where freshness was a sign of pride. So, when freezing became common, she saw it as cheating. And to be fair, early freezing methods did rob food of texture and taste. But today's technology changed all that, locking in nutrients and flavor at their peak. Grandma never lived to see that progress, but she would have been amazed to learn that frozen peas could outshine the ones she shelled herself. Her mistrust was not arrogance, it was loyalty to the earth and to the effort that came with it. Every bunch of carrots, every bag of apples she carried home was an act of belief in honest food. She might have been wrong by modern standards, but her faith in freshness was born from love. A love that no freezer could ever chill. If you've ever watched a raccoon tip over your garbage cans, you might find it hard to imagine inviting one to dinner. Yet, during the Great Depression, resourceful cooks did exactly that, preparing raccoon meat as routinely as chicken. Back then, hunting or trapping raccoons wasn't just a hobby, it was survival. Cookbooks advised carefully cleaning and soaking the meat overnight, typically in vinegar or salt water, to remove the greasy, gamey flavor before roasting it with sweet potatoes or simmering it into a hearty stew. Interestingly, raccoon was even featured prominently in community cook-offs and rural Sunday dinners, considered delicious enough to appear in popular recipes alongside pork and beef. However, the days of openly dining on raccoon meat faded with tightening health and wildlife regulations. Today, consuming raccoons is strongly discouraged or explicitly illegal in many states due to serious concerns about rabies and parasites. Wildlife agencies emphasize that raccoons, those nocturnal bandits once invited to dinner, carry diseases that cooking doesn't always eliminate. Grocery shopping in the 1970s came with a little more mystery than most people realized, especially at the butcher counter. While shoppers expected to get ground beef, hot dogs, or sausage, what they didn't always know was that those meats often contained organ meats like heart, liver, or tongue, blended right in without any clear labeling. It wasn't considered deceptive, it was just how things were done. Waste not, want not. Organ meats had been a staple in traditional cooking for centuries. They were nutrient-dense, packed with iron and vitamins, and most importantly, cheap. For meat processors, using every part of the animal made economic sense. Instead of tossing organ cuts aside, they were mixed into processed meats to add volume and keep costs down. Some people had no issue with it. After all, dishes like liver and onions were common. But others had no idea what they were eating. By the late 20th century, food regulations tightened, and full disclosure became mandatory. Labels had to clearly state what was inside, and consumers got a better understanding of what was actually in their meat. Have you ever felt so hungry you thought you could take down a whole horse? Well, in the 1950s, that wasn't just a piece of hyperbole, it was a very literal statement. While horse meat never really rose to the heights a tenderloin steak or blue crabs did, it was something that people warmed up to more and more as economic strife and being a U.S. citizen started going hand in hand. Do you remember how we were just talking about trans fats being rooted in World War II-era food rationing strategies? Yeah, that whole period really induced a new way of thinking when it came to food. People were doubling down on making the most of whatever they had and opening their horizons to things they had previously been really dismissive of. Horse meat had a pretty bad reputation, especially since most Americans had a sentimental view of horses. They were pets. They were your next best friend after dogs, they were great workers, and they were beautiful animals you could write poetry about. I think we romanticize anything we can ride into the sunset. But anyway, horse meat started to become a pretty common alternative to beef. Butcher shops would even change the name to have an easier time selling it. But most people started to pick up on the fact that cheval wasn't really real meat. Plus, as technology developed and replaced traditional agricultural methods, a lot of farmers found that they had no real use for all the horses they had anymore. And, well, I know I said they were your second closest bestie, but you'd be surprised what people will do to have fewer mouths to feed, especially if it feeds their own in the process. Home-cured bacon was once the pride of farmhouse kitchens, salted, hung, and smoked with care. Families passed down curing recipes like heirlooms, believing that a bit of salt and thyme could preserve more than just meat. It could preserve self-sufficiency. But in the 1950s, science stepped in with a warning. Nitrates, long used in curing, might not be as harmless as they seemed. Studies found they could turn into carcinogenic compounds when heated, sparking one of the earliest food safety scares of the modern age. The government began regulating their use, and homemade bacon suddenly fell under suspicion. People were told to buy factory-sealed packages instead, stamped with federal approval and safety codes. For rural households, it felt like losing a piece of freedom. The smoky scent of bacon in the smokehouse became a relic, replaced by the sterile shine of refrigerated aisles. Once a symbol of self-reliance, home curing was now a risk too great to take. During the hardest days of the Great Depression, families discovered ways to use every bit of available food, including parts that modern cooks might discreetly discard, leading to dishes like blood soup made from chickens or pigs. This thick, savory stew was surprisingly popular, especially among immigrant communities where wasting animal parts was practically a sin. To prepare the soup, fresh blood was immediately whisked with vinegar to prevent clotting, then simmered slowly alongside onions, garlic, spices, and grains, yielding a protein-rich, iron-packed meal designed to stretch tight budgets further than your granddad's wallet on payday. Interestingly, similar dishes remain popular today in European cuisines like Polish czernina or Filipino dinuguan, suggesting Depression-era Americans weren't alone in turning blood into hearty comfort food. But as food safety awareness grew, authorities tightened regulations on dishes using animal blood, citing serious risks of pathogens like Salmonella or E. coli if improperly handled. Today, restaurants or commercial kitchens serving blood-based recipes require strict health inspections and special handling permits, meaning Grandma's favorite soup might now invite an unwanted visit from the health inspector. Mornings in the 1970s often started the same way. Parents sipping their coffee, kids getting ready for school, and, in many households, children drinking coffee right alongside the adults. It wasn't unusual. In fact, in some families it was encouraged, especially in certain cultural traditions where a little coffee with milk and sugar was considered perfectly fine for young ones. Some parents even believed it helped build character or made kids feel more grown up. Coffee for kids wasn't just about the caffeine, it was part of breakfast. Some children dunked their toast into it, while others drank a watered-down version, often loaded with sugar. It wasn't uncommon for grandparents to pour a little into a toddler's bottle, swearing it would keep them calm, an idea that hasn't exactly aged well. But as health studies evolved, concerns over caffeine's effects on developing bodies became harder to ignore. Doctors warned that regular consumption could stunt growth, interfere with sleep, and even lead to increased heart rates. While coffee itself was never banned for kids, the cultural norm slowly faded. Today, it's more likely to raise eyebrows than fill sippy cups. But back then, a cup of joe before school wasn't shocking. It was just part of growing up, one jittery sip at a time. Funnily enough, beluga caviar used to be pretty cheap. I mean, by the 50s, it was definitely a plaything of the uber elite, but it started out as a pretty cheap thing you could just get from sturgeon. It's kind of hard to imagine, right? The image we associate with it today started from upper-class culture, basically putting the thing on a pedestal. It didn't help that every establishment that was meant to cater to this exclusive class was also putting it on all of their menus. You had beluga caviar on crackers with expensive champagne or chilled vodka, with blini and creme fraiche. The possibilities were pretty endless. It became something you associate with old money, with diplomatic gatherings and big political events, and the kind of thing that was just too rich for the blood of an average worker. That's still true today, but hey, it's at least comforting to know that in some era, it used to be considered pretty cheap, almost unsavory, really. Do you get the hype? I mean, let's say you had the money to burn. Would you still be spending it on caviar? Not to impress a date or to hit a rich flex, just as a food. Potted meat spreads were once a survival food, tucked into lunchboxes and ration kits alike. Cheap, salty, and shelf-stable, they fed factory workers and families through tough times. But by the 1950s, the ingredients list started raising eyebrows, especially the preservatives. Borax, once used to keep the meat fresh, was found to be toxic in even small amounts. When the Food and Drug Administration cracked down, cans were pulled from stores, and a generation's comfort food was suddenly deemed dangerous. The smell of potted meat lingered in kitchens long after the last can disappeared. It was the end of an era when lasting forever was considered a virtue. The ban taught people that longevity did not always mean safety, and that the race for convenience came with hidden costs. For many, it was a small but haunting reminder that even survival foods could turn against you. Dinner parties in the 1970s had one dish that seemed to defy logic: the Savory Jello mold. A wobbly tower of gelatin, often packed with processed meats, canned vegetables, and a suspiciously artificial glow, it was a centerpiece of many tables. Whether it was ham and lime gelatin, chicken suspended in tomato aspic, or a seafood salad encased in lemon-flavored jello, this culinary oddity was both a conversation starter and, for some, a challenge to eat. Jello molds had been around for decades, but after World War II, food companies aggressively marketed them as an easy, elegant way to serve meals. Housewives clipped recipes from magazines, creating gelatin-packed creations filled with everything from olives to pimentos. Processed meats like Spam or bologna often found their way into the mix, held together by gelatin and thickened with mayonnaise. It was a product of its time, efficient, visually striking, and heavy on artificial additives like food dyes and stabilizers. As food safety and nutrition research evolved, concerns over processed meats, excessive artificial ingredients, and sodium levels grew. By the 1980s, the popularity of savory gelatin dishes faded. Today, they're more of a retro curiosity than a dinner staple. While city rats today might prompt a frantic call to pest control, desperate times during the Great Depression transformed these rodents from street menace to last resort protein. Eating rat meat wasn't common practice, but urban families facing starvation did indeed resort to capturing and cooking these widely detested animals. Rat meat required meticulous cleaning, soaking in brine or vinegar, and thorough cooking at high temperatures, usually roasted or simmered into stews heavily seasoned to disguise its origins. Historical accounts indicate that rat dinners emerged mostly from extreme necessity rather than culinary experimentation, with some cooks humorously admitting the biggest challenge was convincing diners it tasted almost like rabbit, provided they didn't think too hard about it. Naturally, health concerns arose from consuming urban rodents, notorious carriers of disease, think plague and leptospirosis, conditions more serious than indigestion after Thanksgiving dinner. These legitimate dangers pushed health authorities to unequivocally declare rat meat illegal and unsafe, permanently closing down any possibility of a rat roast revival. Modern laws reflect clear public health priorities, strictly forbidding consumption of rodents, classifying them as dangerous vermin rather than viable food sources. In Depression-era America, protein was at a premium, and butcher shops quietly began offering an unconventional choice to economically strained families: horsemeat. Marketed discreetly as an affordable alternative to beef, horsemeat steaks, sausages, and roasts made regular appearances on dinner tables. Recipes often called for marinating the meat overnight to tenderize its notoriously tougher texture, while seasoning with garlic, bay leaves, and red wine could cleverly disguise its slightly sweeter, iron-rich taste. Interestingly, newspapers of the time published editorials praising horsemeat's nutritional value, hoping to encourage skeptical diners to saddle up and give it a try. However, public acceptance faded rapidly after World War II, as horses transitioned fully from livestock status to beloved pets, sparking a cultural backlash against consuming an animal more commonly pictured pulling carts or carrying cowboys into sunsets. Today, slaughtering horses for food is banned nationwide, driven by both ethical concerns and potential contamination from medications given to animals not raised for consumption. The FDA classifies horses as companion animals, effectively shutting the stable door on commercial sale of horse meat. Back in the 1970s, hot dogs were everywhere, at ballparks, backyard cookouts, and school cafeterias. Whether boiled, grilled, or roasted over an open flame, they were an American staple. What few people realized, though, was that those perfectly pink Franks owed their color and long shelf life to a heavy dose of sodium nitrates. These preservatives kept hot dogs looking fresh and safe from bacterial growth, but over time, concerns started sizzling. Nitrates and nitrites were widely used in processed meats, not just for preservation, but also to enhance flavor. The problem? Studies began linking high nitrate consumption to potential cancer risks, particularly due to their conversion into nitrosamines, compounds found to be carcinogenic in lab tests. While no one was dropping their hot dog at the site of a study, health experts started warning against excessive consumption, especially for kids who were already eating them by the dozen. By the late 20th century, regulations tightened, and manufacturers began reducing nitrate levels while introducing uncured options with natural preservatives like celery powder. Today, nitrate-free hot dogs are an alternative, but traditional versions still exist, just with stricter oversight. In the 1950s, it was pretty common to see a certain ingredient known as bisphenol A in most canned foods. They were always in the linings. Now, the interesting part of this is that this was actually so adaptable that it went in everything from canned food to baby bottles, but it wasn't until much later that people got to know about how dangerous it was. Concerns had been popping up of women having hormonal or reproductive issues and children having issues in development. This was found to be linked to BPA. Apparently, the thing is an endocrine disruptor, which means it can trick your body into thinking it's producing more estrogen than it is. Still, throughout the 50s, companies were trying to make this the industry standard. After a while, they pretty much succeeded at doing it too. It got approved by the FDA and everything, but hey, we all have hiccups. Any Campbell's or Heinz products would usually have it, and lots of canned fruits also were built with it. Pretty weird how easy it is for this stuff to get around, huh? Calf brain sandwiches sound unsettling now, but once they were a small-town delicacy. Served hot on toasted buns with onions and mustard, they were a common lunch in diners across the Midwest. Farmers loved them for their price and protein, and few thought twice about it. But by the 1950s, whispers of strange neurological diseases in livestock began circulating. Scientists could not prove much yet, but the fear was enough. Health departments issued warnings, and suddenly, brains on bread vanished from menus almost overnight. Diners stopped serving them, and butchers stopped selling them, more out of caution than law. It was one of the first modern examples of fear outpacing science, shaping what Americans felt safe eating. Those who remembered the sandwiches described them as tender, rich, and oddly comforting. But comfort was no match for paranoia. The calf brain sandwich became a ghost of its own making, proof that appetite can turn to fear faster than any disease can spread. Before I start telling you about the tragic downfall of absinthe, let's do a little summary on what it really is. So, it's this green spirit that you get from mixing a few herbs, but the one we really need to keep track of here is wormwood. Why? Well, besides the fact that it gets its name from wormwood, Artemisia absinthium, the thing itself has a spicy little compound we call thujone, or otherwise known as the 50s equivalent of acid. Except we're not talking about a nice little trip with your friends and your sunset lamp psychedelic playlist. This time, we're talking about cases of epilepsy, insanity, and aggression in users. This eventually evolved into hysteria after the absinthe murder of 1905. One Jean Lanfray ended up killing his entire family after a long night with absinthe and several other drinks. And by 1912, hysteria had gotten so bad that the United States had outlawed it completely. In the 50s, you still couldn't get it legally, especially not for personal use. You would have to get it smuggled in from Spain or Portugal, and most people would just make bootleg absinthe, which was even worse. I mean worse as in it'll do whatever alcohol does to you regularly. Scientists ended up finding out that thujone actually doesn't cause insanity or anything of the sort, and Jean was just yet another drunken homicidal maniac. In the 1970s, plastic was the future. It was lightweight, shatterproof, and perfect for everything from food storage to baby bottles. Parents heated up formula in plastic bottles without a second thought, and leftovers were stored in sturdy, reusable containers. What no one realized was that many of these plastics contained BPA, bisphenol A, a chemical that would later become one of the most controversial additives in food packaging history. BPA was used to make plastic stronger and more durable, and it did its job well. The problem? It didn't just stay in the plastic. When exposed to heat, like in a microwave, dishwasher, or even just warm baby formula, it could leach into food and drinks. By the late 20th century, scientists started studying its effects, linking it to potential hormonal disruptions and developmental issues in children. The public backlash came fast. By the 2000s, consumer pressure pushed many companies to phase out BPA in baby products, and in 2012, the FDA banned it from baby bottles and sippy cups. Today, BPA-free is a major selling point, but back in the 70s, no one thought twice about it. In cities struggling through the Great Depression, hungry families frequently turned to their local waterways for sustenance, pulling dinner straight from rivers that today would make even industrial chemists hesitate. Eating fish from polluted rivers wasn't exactly gourmet dining, but it was survival cooking at its most pragmatic. Catfish, carp, and perch were typically breaded, fried, or baked with onions and potatoes to mask muddy flavors, a method that probably made diners thankful the river's taste didn't seep through too strongly. Even back then, though, residents jokingly admitted their fish dinners had a hint of motor oil, hardly a selling point, but better than going hungry. Public health warnings of the era were minimal. Pollutants like mercury, PCBs, and industrial chemicals weren't widely understood yet, leaving fishermen blissfully unaware of their toxic supper. Eventually, environmental awareness and science caught up to common sense. By the 1970s, federal laws like the Clean Water Act drastically limited fishing in contaminated waters, explicitly labeling certain rivers off-limits due to severe health risks linked to cancer and neurological disorders. For much of American history, brewing beer at home was a tradition as old as the country itself. Families crafted their own recipes, adjusting flavors to their liking. But by the early 20th century, Prohibition changed everything. Even after it was repealed in 1933, one strange law remained. While making wine at home was legal, brewing beer was not. That didn't stop people, though. By the 1970s, home brewing was a quiet but thriving underground hobby. People who wanted fresh, custom-made beer often turned to home brewing kits, handed-down recipes, or straight-up improvisation. Fermenting was done in basements, garages, or wherever a bubbling carboy could be tucked away. It wasn't just about cost savings, it was about control. Store-bought beer in the 70s was mostly light, mass-produced lagers. If you wanted something with real character, you had to make it yourself. Legally speaking, though, that homemade brew was contraband. The law didn't exactly make sense, and by the late 1970s, it finally changed. In 1978, President Jimmy Carter signed a bill legalizing home brewing for personal use. That small change set the stage for the craft beer revolution that exploded decades later. Lard was a really dominant fat, as you might already know. It's basically half the flavor in all of our fast food chains, and there are many hamburgers that wouldn't have their reputation without it. There are an equal number of people going to their doctor for cardiac issues at an alarmingly young age due to it as well. But why was pig fat rendered everyone's drug of choice? Well, in fast food frying, it was known for doing a few delicious things. It gave the food a crispy texture like nothing else did. It enhanced the flavor way better than any natural oils ever did. And since pork was already so widely produced and consumed just about, well, everywhere, it was also a lot more available and affordable than, let's say, unprocessed vegetable oils. This meant that it was ideal for the fast food industry, which almost always needed large-scale frying. Nowadays, there are places that still make lard-based fast food like in the old times, but most people were very happy trading away the flavor for the extra health gains. I guess if you really wanted an authentic one, you'd have to find somebody that tried them in the 50s because they used to use proper beef tallow back then, straight from the animal. It's still something you see a lot in little corners here and there, like Mexican-American cuisine or soul food, but as far as the mainstream goes, it's a relic of the past. Coca-Cola once had a secret ingredient that no one dared talk about: coca leaf extract. For decades, tiny traces of it gave the drink its signature kick, a stimulant wrapped in sweetness. By the 1950s, that secret had become a liability. The Food and Drug Administration began tightening regulations around narcotics and stimulants, forcing Coca-Cola to quietly reformulate without ever admitting what changed. Rumors swirled that the beloved drink was being cleaned up, and fans noticed the taste shift almost overnight. The company insisted nothing had changed, but the ban on coca leaf extracts told a different story. It was part of a broader cultural reckoning with drugs and morality, where pleasure, even in small doses, was treated as a threat. By the end of the decade, Coca-Cola was as American as ever, but its wild edge was gone. The new formula kept people refreshed, but not quite as awake. In the 1970s, canned soup was a kitchen staple. With just a can opener and a pot, you had an instant meal, thick, salty, and packed with flavor. But what made it so addictive? A little ingredient called MSG, monosodium glutamate, was the secret behind that deep, savory taste that made every spoonful feel richer than it actually was. Tomato soup, chicken noodle, cream of mushroom, virtually every variety had a hefty dose of it. MSG had been used in processed foods for decades, praised for enhancing flavor and making even the simplest ingredients taste more complex. Food manufacturers loved it because it masked the blandness of cheap ingredients, creating the illusion of homemade quality. And for consumers, it made canned soup feel more satisfying, even when it was mostly water and salt. But in the late 20th century, MSG came under fire. Reports of headaches, nausea, and a mysterious collection of symptoms dubbed Chinese restaurant syndrome led to widespread concern. While scientific studies later found no definitive link between MSG and health issues for most people, the damage was done. By the 1990s, food companies started reducing MSG levels and slapping "No MSG" labels on their products. In the leanest years of the Great Depression, nothing edible went to waste. Not even the parts most people today wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. like boiled squirrel heads. This peculiar dish, particularly favored in southern Appalachia, involved simmering squirrel heads slowly, extracting tender meat from cheeks and even brains, both prized as delicacies rich in nutrients. Preparation required patience, typically slow-boiled with salt, onions, and herbs until the meat easily slipped off the bone, a culinary adventure often joked about as the original head-to-tail eating philosophy. Eating squirrel heads wasn't merely a quirky rural curiosity, but a necessity-driven culinary solution. During times when meat was scarce, discarding any edible part was economically unthinkable. However, modern regulations strongly discourage consuming squirrel brains, not merely because it's unsettling dinner table conversation, but due to legitimate health concerns. Studies revealed a disturbing connection between squirrel brain consumption and a rare fatal neurological disorder known as Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, a cousin of the infamous mad cow disease. Share the kitchen rules Grandma got wrong in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories cooked with love and a little nostalgia.